translations of shlokas that have been included in this book. So that is essentially what the book is about. I don't need to, say this for any of you, but for those who may watch this video and have not read the Mahabharata or don't know much about the Mahabharata, in the book itself, I have a 50-word summary of the Mahabharata, if it is at all possible to summarize the Mahabharata in 50 words. And I have a slightly longer 500-word summary also of the book. So one very fascinating thing is that the Mahabharata itself, right, not what scholars have said or not what researchers have said, but if you read the full Mahabharata, in the Mahabharata itself, the text, the epic describes itself as all of these different things. An Akhyan, a Panchaved, a Krishna Ved, a Karshna Ved, Itihasa, Purana, we all obviously know. Jaya is also something we also know. But it also describes itself as an Upanishad, a Katha, a Samhita, a Mahagyana, a Shastra, and it describes itself as a Dharma Shastra, Artha Shastra, Moksha Shastra, Niti Shastra, Charita, and an Upakhyan, which is very, very interesting. That it is describing itself as both an Akhyan and an Upakhyan and a Samvad, which is a dialogue. So this is fairly consistent with the Mahabharata itself, which both at the beginning and at the end says that whatever is in the world is to be found in the Mahabharata, and what is not in the Mahabharata does not exist outside of it. So I said some of the motivations behind putting this book together. There were, in my introduction, I also talk about 3 or 4 reasons for this book. The Mahabharata obviously is such a timeless story that there have been hundreds and thousands of retellings of these stories. Everything from stories meant for children in the Amar Chitrakatha, to scholarly works, to novelizations, to adaptations, to fictional retellings, and all. So anytime anyone, I think, who is interested in the Mahabharata gets a chance to tell a story from the Mahabharata, I don't think they will ever step back. And I was no different from that. The second was that I wanted to retell them in a modern idiom. And what I mean by that is that the stories themselves are timeless, but the language in which they are told changes from time to time. So if you read Kishori Mohan Ganguly's unabridged Mahabharata from 1896, you will find that there is a lot of archaic English usage out there. If you read some newer translations, you will find the language changes. If you read fictional retellings, you will find again that the language changes. So I wanted to accomplish 2 things, retell these stories and tell them in a way that will appeal to the modern reader. And I have deliberately used the word thriller because if you look at it, the Mahabharata, apart from being all the things that we saw in the previous slide, being an Akhyan, an Upakhyan, a Dharma Shastra, Niti Shastra, Charita, Upanishad, and all, it is also, I believe, the greatest thriller also ever written. Another reason was, and I've said that I wanted to have enough references and footnotes, end notes for people to do a fact check, or if they are interested, they could go back, look up the footnotes, read and consult the unabridged Mahabharata, and that itself can become a vehicle for doing a lot more investigations, explorations of the Mahabharata. And I wanted to also address some of the distortions and misrepresentations which have been introduced in this, by some authors. So, for example, we have been told, we have seen, we have read in books, we have seen in movies or TV adaptations that at Draupadi's Swayamvar, Karn was not allowed to compete in Draupadi's Swayamvar, that when he attempted to lift the bow, he was stopped by Draupadi saying that she would not marry a Sutputra. But when you read the Mahabharata, you find that nothing of this sort happened. Neither did Draupadi stop Karn from competing or trying to complete the goal that had been set, which was to pierce the fish's eye with an arrow. But Karn actually took part in the Swayamvar. He attempted and he failed to do the Lakshya Bhedan. That was that was a condition for winning over Draupadi and the Swayamvar. So therefore, I've added a footnote that says that if you go to 179.4, which is basically the first Purva, the Adi Parva and you go to the 179th chapter and you go to the fourth verse, it tells us that Karan participated but failed to pierce the target. And I ask this very fundamental question that why have authors chosen to misrepresent these things and rationalize their own prejudices, ideological agendas, or maybe they're just not good at creating their own original fiction. So they see it very convenient to take the Mahabharata, but then they are not creative enough either to tell a good story. They bring out their own biases, but these are questions I do not get into. Rather, that I have used this book to also provide references from the original Mahabharata. So I said that this is based on the critical edition, right? There are several recensions of the Mahabharata available. There's a northern, a southern recension, the Kumbakonam edition, the Grantha edition, and so on. The critical edition was a project that was undertaken starting in the 1930s and it completed in 1966 with the publication of all 10 volumes, uh, basically of all the 18 parvas of the Mahabharata. And what this project did was, and Sukthankar was the first editor of this critical edition project, and they consulted more than 1,000 Sanskrit and other language versions of the Mahabharata to arrive at the earliest constituted text that they could find of the Mahabharata by consulting different editions. They followed the process, which is described very nicely in a book by Suthankar. I strongly recommend people should take a look at it also. So this critical edition arrived at 73,000 shlokas for the Mahabharata, little less than the 100,000 that we have been that we are told in the popular imagination that the Mahabharata has 1 lakh shlokas, and there are some recensions of the Mahabharata that reach this number. In fact, one of them goes to more than 1 lakh shlokas. So the critical edition basically said that 73,000 shlokas for the Mahabharata and another 6,000 odd shlokas for the Harivansha, which brings us to almost 80,000, a little less than 80,000 shlokas across the Mahabharata and the Harivansh as the critical edition. So this becomes the source for a lot of modern translations and work on the Mahabharata. This is in Sanskrit. So the 79,000 shlokas are available in Sanskrit. And for committed serious scholars, there is a critical apparatus that was also released that runs into thousands of pages. And what it does is essentially it collects all the different editions, versions of the Mahabharata that the editors of Andarkar Research Institute consulted. And they have notes and they have explanations of how they arrived at which shloka to include and which not to include. So if someone really wants to get even deeper, they can consult the critical apparatus. But all of this is in Sanskrit. So for English language, what did I consult? It was the unabridged 10-volume translation by the late Shri Vivek Dev Roy, who sadly passed away on the 1st of November. So he, from the year 2010 to 2014, 2 volumes a year, he translated the unabridged Mahabharata. It was published by Penguin. And he followed this up with the Harivansh and then the Valmiki Ramayana, the Markandeya Puran, and 5 other Puranas. So this was my primary source for consultation. And obviously there were other editions also available that I consulted, including reference material like Vettamani's Puranic Encyclopedia, Sorensen's Index to the Names of the Mahabharata, and others. So there are other unabridged English translations also available, very few of them. 2 done in India by K.M. Ganguly and a few years later by Manmath Nath Dutt. The University of Chicago tried doing one based on the critical edition. It took more than 30 years or so for them to finish it. There's one by the Writers' Workshop by P. Lal. That's more of a poetic transcreation rather than an unabridged translation. So very few translations exist in the English language of the original Mahabharata. So what was the spark for the book, right? Why the particular number 67? How did I get hold of this number and how did I figure out which the 67 Upakhyanas are? So very easily, the the spark for this book was a paper published about 20 years back or more, roughly 20 years back, I think in 2005, by a very, very renowned scholar, Hilpeitel, and who was also associated with the publisher Motilal Banarsi Das, and who also sadly passed away in 2003, in February of 2000, in February of 2023. He wrote this 45 page long paper called Not Without Subtales Telling Truths and Laws in the Sanskrit Epics. And he looked at the subtales and all in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. In there, he basically said that I'm going to count all references that mention upakhyanas either in passing or they are cited as an upakhyana in the Parva Sangraha Parv, which is the very first Upaparv of the Mahabharata, or if they are called as such in the Northern Recension or in these running heads for units in the Pune Critical, that is the Bhandarkar Critical Edition. So, using all of these criteria, he arrived at a number of 67. Just to be clear, if you look at all the Upakathas in the Mahabharata, there are actual number is much more. Some say there are more than 500 such Upakathas in the Mahabharata. There are only 67 uh, that actually meet this criteria. Now, what are those 67? So, Alf very nicely, generously provides not only a list of all those 67, but he also provides a reference to how long they are, where they begin. Some of them are long. The Nal Damayanti, for example, the Amba, the Ramopakyan, they run into 6, 7, 800 shlokas long. Some of them are just one chapter, like 23, 24 shlokas long. The Indradyumna is very short. The Vriddha Kumari Upakyan is very short. So they are, from a couple of pages long to as many as, 50, 60, 70 pages long. And these are the 67. Some of them will be very familiar to you, like Shakuntala, Yayati, uh, Vashisht, Sund Upasund, Nal Damayanti, Agastya, Savitri, Rama, as in Ramopakyan, the Ramayana that is told there. Yakshi Prashna is something that we all have heard of, and so on. So this is the total list of 67 that I have taken in my book. Uh, if you so the very first one is Shakuntala, and the very last one is Nakul, which is a golden mongoose, which uh, this mongoose appears at the end of Yudhishthir's yagya. And the first one is fascinating for multiple reasons, right? So Shakuntala, as we know, was the daughter of sage Vishwamitra and Menka the Apsara, and she was sent basically by Indra, the king of the gods, to disrupt Vishwamitra's penances, because Indra, being the god, the perpetually insecure god that he was worried that Vishwamitra would do so hard penances that he would essentially acquire enough austerities to challenge Indra, and therefore he sent Menka. And from that distraction was born Shakuntala, who was found by Rishi Kanva. And since she had been sheltered from the wild animals by Shakun birds, Rishi Kanva named her Shakuntala. So Shakuntala grows up in Kanva's ashram. And once she grows up, she becomes a beautiful young maiden. And Dushyant, on a hunt, gets detached from the rest of his retinue. He finds himself thirsty and all, and he finds himself in Rishi Kanva's ashram. The Rishi is not there, and Dushyant is greeted by Rishi Putri Shakuntala, and he falls for her. He professes his love for her. Uh, he proposes to her. Shakuntala agrees. The two marry, and uh, Dushyant goes away, promising to call for her as soon as he could, which he doesn't for several years. So that is the roughly the story of Shakuntala. Now, fast forward several generations later, when 36 years have passed after the Kurukshetra war, and we know what happened in the Kurukshetra war. One of the notable things was, as Gandhari walked the battlefield going over the dead bodies of her sons who had been killed in the war, she gets very angry and she curses Krishna. And she says, this war could have been avoided had you so decided, Krishna, but you didn't. So just as I am weeping, my daughters-in-law are weeping, so will your women of the Yadav, the Vrishni lineage weep. 36 years from now, you will also weep and you will also die. 36 years had passed, and we know what happened. Uh, the princes of the Yadav dynasty, they go up to the rishis and they taunt them, or they kind of make fun of them by dressing one of the princes as a pregnant lady, and ask the rishis as to when what will the child be, and they curse. We know that much. But who were the sages who cursed the entire Yadav dynasty to be destroyed? There was a There were three rishis. One of them was Vishwamitra. Another one was Kanva. So the start of the Mahabharata, or the Kuru dynasty, really begins with Dushyant and Shakuntala. And several generations later, we have the end also at the hands of Rishi Kanva, or through his curse. There's a very, very beautiful cyclic theme that can be found in a lot of these stories in the Mahabharata. Similarly, there is Dushyant, right? We know Dushyant came in and came into Rishi Kanva's ashram when he was on a hunt. So how did the Mahabharata tale itself get told? So there is obviously when sage Vyasa, and the Mahabharata itself tells us that Ved Vyasa, or Krishna Dwapayan, spent 3 years writing the Mahabharata. And what did he do? He first recited it to his son Shuk, and then to his four disciples. One of those disciples was Vaishampayan. Vaishampayan then, at King Janmajaya's Sarpasatra, the snake sacrifice, he recites it in public for the very first time. Who was Janmajaya? Janmajaya was Parikshit's son. Who was Parikshit? He was Abhimanyu's son. Abhimanyu, as we all know, was Arjun's son. How did Parikshit die? Parikshit died as a result of being bitten by Takshak the snake, because he was cursed by a rishi's son to die such a death. And why was Parikshit cursed? Because when he was on a hunt, he got thirsty. He arrives at Rishi's ashram. The Rishi has taken a Maun Vrat, a vow of silence, so he's not seeing anything. When Parikshit talks to the Rishi doesn't respond. So Parikshit gets angry and he takes a dead snake and wraps it around the Rishi's neck and leaves. And the Rishi's son is told that his father has been insulted in this manner, and he therefore curses Parikshit. The theme of hunting and kings going into the forest, losing their way, is something that is something that occurs again and again and again in the Mahabharata. In fact, we know how did Pandu die? Pandu also went on a hunt, and he heard the sound, and Pandu was so skilled an archer that he could shoot at a target just by hearing its sound. And he shot, and he ends up killing Rishi Kindam and his wife. One of the other fascinating things that we are told in the Mahabharata is that Pandu didn't shoot one arrow. Pandu shot 5 arrows. The number five also therefore becomes somewhat significant here. But the theme of hunting and kings and princes finding themselves in all sorts of trouble, and episodes emerging out of that, is a very, very common theme. The other one that is very striking is that when you compare Vyasa's Shakuntala with Kalidasa's Shakuntala, you find a very stark difference in how somewhat meek or submissive a character Shakuntala is in the uh, Kalidasa's poem, Shakuntala Abhinyanam. Now, if you take that the period of time between when Vyasa composed his Mahabharata and wrote about Shakuntala and Kalidas to be 1,000 or 1,500 years or even longer, it does tell us something about the progression of society and how societal norms had been changing. This is a very fascinating phrase. Child is the father of man. We have heard about it from They were written about 220 years back by, I think, the English poet William Wordsworth. And it is basically, it calls back to how, upon seeing a rainbow, and I think the poem begins, "My heart leaps when I behold a rainbow," how the author says that he, as an adult, experienced the same sense of joy and wonder as upon seeing the rainbow as he did when he was a child. Well, a very similar phrase is used by Shakuntala, who says that the wife is a sacred ground in which the husband is born again, but with a much more profound meaning in that sense. And when she's having that discussion, debate with her husband, Dushyant. Another theme is of mirror stories. So we know the core story of the Mahabharata, but very fascinatingly enough, in a few of the Upakathas, this is sort of repeated as what is, in modern idiom, modern literature is called a mirror story. So Nal Damayanti is one, the Ramayana story is another one, and interestingly enough, both these stories are recounted by a sage in the Aranyak Parv in response to questions that Yudhishthir himself puts forth. In the Ramayana, for example, in the Ramopakyan, so we are talking, when I talk about the Ramayana, I'm talking about the rendition of the Ramayana as an Upakyan in the Mahabharata. This happens shortly after the attempted abduction of Draupadi by Jayadratha. And when she is rescued by Arjun and Bhim and they come back, Yudhishthir is again very, very saddened, and he asks that, "Have you seen any woman who has undergone as many sufferings as Draupadi has?" And then Yudhishthir is told that yes, was this princess of Mithila called Sita, and the story of Rama is told then. In the case of Nal Damayanti, the Upakyan takes place almost at the very beginning of the Aranyak Parv, where the Pandavas have started their uh, their 12-year exile. The 13th year is going to be spent, incognito and Agyatwas, but the 12-year period has just started, and Yudhishthir is very, very distraught, and he asks the sage Brihadashva that, "Have you seen anyone as miserable as I am?" And in response, he is told that yes, there was a prince called Nal who also lost his kingdom, but he gained it back. Interestingly enough, if you know the story of Nal Damayanti, Nal also gets addicted to gambling to his cousin, and he loses everything. But he does not stake his wife, even though he's asked that your wife Damayanti, when he's lost everything, that your wife Damayanti is still available, you can stake her. Nal does not stake his wife. Yudhishthir does. So perhaps it also tells us something about how society had changed between the times of Nal, Damayanti, and Yudhishthir. Fascinatingly enough, as the Upakyan ends, the Nal Damayanti Upakyan ends. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Kurukshetra war. We know that Duryodhan asked Dronacharya to go and kidnap Yudhishthir. Why? Why not outright tell Dronacharya that capture and kill Yudhishthir? Because Bhishma had said that he would not kill any of the Pandavas, but Drona had not made any such promise. So why not ask Dronacharya to go ahead and simply capture and kill Yudhishthir? The answer is that Duryodhan was scared that if Yudhishthir was killed, his brothers, especially Arjun and Bhim, would not spare Duryodhan. They would capture him, they would kill him. So Duryodhan was scared of that outcome. He was undoubtedly scared of Bhim and Arjun. So what was his motivation in wanting to just capture Yudhishthir? He says that I will capture Yudhishthir and I will make him play another game of dice. And Yudhishthir is not good at playing dice because he lost not one but two rounds of dice that we already had. I will make him play dice. He will lose, and he'll again have to go to the forest for 12, 13 years. That was his goal, because we are told that Yudhishthir was fond of gambling, but he was not very good at gambling. Well, in the Nal Damayanti Upakyan, it so turns out that at the end of the story, the sage Brihadashva teaches Yudhishthir how to play dice. Duryodhan never knew that. So this opens up a very fascinating what if scenario, that what what if Duryodhan had succeeded in having Dronacharya capture Yudhishthir, and what if there had been another round of dice? This can perhaps become the motivation for a derivative story to be written by modern authors, possibly. Okay, causality. Why? Isn't one of the fascinating questions about the Mahabharata? Why did this happen? Who was this person? Why did he behave like this? Some of the questions that come to our mind is that who was Vidur? He was one of the three brothers. He was a half brother, so to say. Dhritarashtra was born to Ambika, and Pandu was born to Ambalika. That is the three. These two were the three princesses of Kashi. The eldest one was Amba, and we'll talk about Amba in just a little bit. So, who was Vidur? He was born to one of the maids between the union of Krishna Dwapayan and the maid. So he never became the king, but we know that he was the wisest of all the three brothers. Vidur was, we are also told, he was the reincarnation of Dharma, of Yamraj. So why was Vidur born as an incarnation, or why was Dharmaraj born as Vidur? Why was he incarnated? And more importantly, why did he not become king? Because another incarnation of Dharma, which is Yudhishthir, became the king. No doubt about that he was a prince, then he became a king. Of course, he had to undergo a lot of sufferings, but why not the case with Vidur? The Animandave Upakhyan tells us this. It's a very short one, just 34 shlokas, and appears right at the start of the Adi Parv in the Sambhav Parv, and it's a fascinating tale in itself. Why did Bhishma live so long? He was one of the Vasus, and he was cursed by sage Vashisht, and he was born to Ganga as her eighth son. Ganga drowned the first seven sons, and she allowed the eighth one to live. We are told that they are cursed, but why were they cursed? Who cursed them? What was the curse? Why did Bhishma have to suffer the curse so long as to live the longest? Why did Bhishma then become a child of Ganga? And even equally, who was Shantanu? And he was also cursed. Why did Shantanu end up being cursed? Why did he marry Ganga? So all of these are fascinating stories told again in a very, very short Upakhyan in the 91st chapter of the Adi Pearl. 22 shlokas, that's it, but a fascinating tale in itself. Why did Draupadi marry the five Pandavas? So after the Swayamvar was won, we are told that when Arjun brings her to Mother Kunti's hut, and maybe in a manner of jesting, they say that look, we have brought you, we have brought you some arms and so on. And Kunti also doesn't see what exactly it is, and she says share it among themselves. And we are told that because the mother had said so, the mother's word could not be countenanced. But there's also what happens is that Drupad is not agreeable to this. He says that, I've never heard of such a thing happening where a woman marries five people. And that is where Krishna Dwapayan, Ved Vyas comes, and he takes Drupad inside to a chamber and tells him that what I'm telling you is only for your ears. And that's when he tells him that who the five Pandavas are and why it is fated that Draupadi will marry the five Pandavas, and who exactly is Draupadi. So Draupadi is a reincarnation of Shri. So that is what the Panchendra Upakhyan tells us again in the very first Parv, the Adi Parv. In the Upakhyanas and actually in the entire tale of the Mahabharata, one other fascinating theme is one of ego, and what goes around comes around. So I've said that in the case of what goes around comes around, you know that how the Kuru dynasty essentially began as a result of sage Kanva bringing up Shakuntala, and how it ended not only because of Gandhari's curse but also because of the curse of Rishi Kanva in Dwarka. But ego is another very, very engrossing and recurring theme in the Mahabharata. So Amba, we are told, was the eldest princess of Kashi. Bhishma gets all three princesses, he kidnaps them or he brings them as Veerashulk for his for his stepbrother, Vichitravirya, because the elder one, Chitrangad, had been killed by another Gandharv named Chitrangad. So Vichitravirya was left. And Amba says that I have already given my heart to Shalva, and therefore, I cannot marry Vichitravirya. And Satyavati says that, yes, okay, that's the right thing to do. And then she's sent along with the guards and maids and Amba's nurse to Shalva, and Shalva refuses to have her because he says that you were already taken by Amba, by Bhishma, and I'm not going to take something, that has been already taken by Bhishma and then discarded, etc., etc. And Amba then goes around till she comes across Parshuram's disciple Akritran, and he tells her that Parshuram will get you justice. She meets her maternal grandfather Hutravahan there, and when Parshuram comes there, Amba basically tells her that nothing other than Bhishma's death is going to satisfy her, and that will be her revenge. But Parshuram still believes that Bhishma will listen to him, whatever it is, whether take Amba back or marry Amba or whatever that be. But what happens is Bhishma says that I can't take Amba back. I have taken a lifelong vow of celibacy. And the exchange between the two is one of two warriors who are so fierce warriors in their own rights, who have not taken no for an answer from anyone. And here it is that they are having this, essentially look at it as the equivalent of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. And Parshuram basically tells Bhishma that, then fight me and I will kill you. And Bhishma also, he's still relatively young then, his ego is stoked, and he says that, yeah, fine. Uh, if you want to fight, if the great Rama wants to fight, then I, Bhishma, assure you that I will fight you. I also promise you that you will lose, O sage, but I cannot kill my guru, so I won't. And for 21, 22, 23 days, I think the two fight. And in the end, Parshuram is humbled. He accepts defeat. He goes back to Amba and says that I cannot defeat Bhishma. So Bhishma is the victor there. But what happens? How does Bhishma die? On the 10th day, he dies at the hands of Amba, who has been reborn as Shikhandi. And very poignantly, as Shikhandi's arrows pierce Bhishma's body, what does he say? He says that these arrows cannot be Shikhandi's; these arrows are Arjun's. The Mahabharata doesn't tell us who the fatal arrows were shot by, but you can imagine Bhishma saying that, oh, please don't let me die at the hands of a woman. This is the circle of ego essentially completing itself, because he tells Duryodhan at at the end of the Amba Upakhyan that I will not shoot arrows at a woman. In his eyes, Shikhandi was a woman, one who has earlier been a woman. Shikhandi had been a woman as Amba in a previous life, one who has the name of a woman and one who has the form of a woman. So, depending on how you look at it, Shikhandi was either a girl born, I was either a prince born as a man, a prince, or as the Mahabharata tells us, she was actually born as a girl, but then thanks to a yaksh, Sthulkarna, I believe, if I remember correctly, she got the organs of a male and becomes a man. Excuse me. So let's now take a step back and look at some of the other things about this book. This is a little bit of self promotion, so please excuse me for that. I was very, very extremely fortunate that when I approached Sri Vivek Debroy and asked him if he would provide a blurb or a foreword, he agreed immediately. And within a few days, he sent a 1,000-word foreword. And in there, he says that this is very informative. That he says that an akhyan is a narrative, and upakhyan with the first with the prefix added is a narrative or account that is repeatedly told and retold. So, as composed by Krishna Dwapa and Ved Vyasa, Mahabharata was originally an akhyan taught to Romaharshan, Lomaharshan. However, retold again and again through oral transmission, it has become an upakhyan. So that's fascinating. It's also, you can look at it as a subtale. So he ends it with saying that the Mahabharata is a text that deserves to be treated better than Mahabharata for dummies, and I completely agree with that. And he says that the Mahabharata deserves this. So, in my mind, there can be no higher praise than having Sri Vivek Debroi write such generous words. Uh, so, when I shared uh, excerpts and advanced copies with some authors, hoping that they would provide some blurbs, all of them were very, very generous without exception. From Koral Das Gupta, who herself has written a fascinating set of 5 books on the Panch Kanyas. The latest one, Tara, that has just come out a few months back. Very lyrical retelling, reimagination of these 5 incredible women from our epics. Meenakshi ji needs no introduction, herself a seminal historian. Her books on Rama and Ayodhya and on Sati and Kashi are path-breaking. Vikrant Pandey's book is again an amazing read that he has co-authored with Nilesh Kulkarni in the footsteps of Rama. Anand Ranganathan needs no introduction. Sai Sarupa herself is the best-selling author of several books on female characters, both from our epics like Rukmani and Draupadi, as well as her own reimaginations or creations, entirely new creations of characters like Abhaya and Avishi and Mori. So, and Sanjeev Sanyal, amazing not only economist and writer on Indian history and historical figures. His last book was Revolutionaries, amazing read. And Aditi Banerjee, again, her book on Gandhari, and then most recently her book on Kashi is one book the likes of which I don't think has ever been written or may ever be written. The way it combines and splices history with the modern dispute on Kashi, as well as the excerpts and retellings about Kashi from the Puranas, including the Skanda Purana. And Gautam Chikarmane himself, a huge Mahabharata aficionado, as well as the author of this uh, fascinating fictionalized tale derived from the Mahabharata called the Tunnel of Varnavat. All of these people, their praise meant a lot, their blurbs meant a lot. So my grateful thanks to all of them. And with that, I'll take a pause. So I'll end this with, first of all, I do tweet at Twitter at Abhinav Agarwal and occasionally on Instagram at Right Abhinav. Please do read the book. If you like it, leave a rating or a review. Tell others about it. And if you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know. I hope you do. But I'll take a pause here.
Thank you, Abhinavji. That was a fascinating one. Uh, I Audience can ask any questions now.
So Dr.
Yes,
Kiran
Kiran.
has a question. So please go ahead.
That was by mistake. My
Okay. So in any case, you can always tweet or ping me on Twitter if you have any questions, or uh, look forward to hearing from all of you. Uh, happy reading, and I hope you like the book.
Yeah, there is, I think, one more question from Durandar.
Yes, fascinating name
Yeah,
from Mr. Dhurandhar Bhattavadekar.
it's the name of some detective, I think, if I remember.
Yes, from Rang Birangi movie.
Oh, okay. Right,
But
right,
I
right.
think that it may also be an actual name. So there are okay. So in chat there's a question. Chirakari Upakyan, would you describe Chirakari as Vyasa's celebration of non-violence? Non-violence and patient examination being Chirakari, always living while violence is momentary. So Chirakari is kind of a fascinating character, right? So here is Rishi Gautam who orders his son to behead his wife because of some perceived infidelity or act of uh, in indiscretion. And here is Chirakari, who was anyway known to take, and this is one of the Upakhyanas, by the way. So he was anyway known to take a lot of time in deciding in any course of action, and he's no different in this one. And he takes both sides. he first argues it from his father's point of view as to why, the father's words should be listened to, they should be obeyed. Then he looks at it from the mother's point of view, that the mother is actually, she gives birth, she gives life, she is the, Jagat Janani, and why, killing the mother is not done and all. And he goes back and forth, back and forth. And by the time he is not even finished deciding, his father comes back. His father has had a change of heart, and he's now worried that what if my son has gone ahead and obeyed my commands and killed my wife and all? But then he also knows that I gave the order to Chirakari, so hopefully there is hope. And he finds that there's none. So to that end, he is sort of the opposite of Parshurama, right? Parshurama was not only a man of immediate action but repeated action. He, we are told he destroyed the entire Yadav lineage, the Kshatriya lineage, not once or twice but 21 times, and then he hands over the entire earth that he has conquered to Rishi Kashyap at the gates of Kurukshetra, and then goes into meditation. So to some extent, you can look at it as an examination or a celebration of ahimsa also. Though, of course, we are told that the greatest proponent of ahimsa in the Mahabharata is Yudhishthir, but then it's the same Yudhishthir who has a change of heart at the end of the Mahabharata itself. So it's fascinating. How's Parshuram depicted in the Mahabharata vis-a-vis other texts? So the primaries, I mean, the most that we are told about Parshurama is actually in the Mahabharata, and there are at least a couple of upakhyanas that are there. Of the 67 itself, there are a couple of upakhyanas that actually talk about Parshurama, and including how come, he was born to a Brahman, yet he had the attributes of a Kshatriya is also what, we are told as a result of a mix-up. The second Upakhyana actually tells us that the mix-up was deliberate on the part of of the mother-in-law, but the Ramayana also tells us something about Parshurama, where there is this non-violent confrontation between Rama and Parshurama. And the Mahabharata also has more than a few instances. There's obviously the Amba Upakhyana, where you have a very detailed description of an account of the battle between Parshurama and Bhishma. And then you have several, at least two Upakhyanas that talk about Parshurama. So he was, I think, he was definitely one of the more aggressive, assertive, man of action sort of avatars of Vishnu, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, so I have a question, slightly off topic maybe. So I was reading Vivek Debroy's like translation, the first volume and the preface, and one of the things I noticed it was his observation that we generally believe that Ramayana came before Mahabharata, right? And we see Ram as this Maryada Purushottam, the perfect man, lives by his principles and so on. Choice of weapons are bow and arrow and all that. And we come to Mahabharata and we see a bit of kind of raw violence in Mahabharata. Like there is mace and there is uh, Bhima deciding to kill Duryodhana and like break Dushasana's thigh, drink his blood or something like that, right? And this seems kind of very different from Ramayana, like Ramayana, where there are rules of engagement and strong principles from both sides. But in Mahabharata, this seems kind of getting blurred. So, in some sense, it would have made sense if we said like Mahabharata came before Ramayana, because and the society kind of changed. But here it seems flipped. So I'm just wondering what your opinion is. I know the topic might be controversial or we don't have enough information, but I really I was puzzled by Mr. Debroy's insights in this, and I'm
So,
just wondering what your opinion is.
so okay. So first of all, there are, any number of schools of thought about the dating and specifically with respect to the lineages, because you have at least a few characters, rishis that are common to both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. There's Vashisht and there is Vishwamitra and even Parshuram who are common to the two. So if you look at it from a very historical point of view, then there cannot be more than a few generations separating the events in the two epics. Uh, there is one writer, researcher called Jijit who has done a lot of work in this area, and he has published two books also. The uh, Actually three books: the Rivers of the Rig Veda, the Geography of the Ramayana, and the Geography of the Mahabharata in two volumes.
Yeah,
So
actually, we
he
have got
has some
Jijit
insights.
here. So we got Jijit on this like event, and he spoke both about both his books in past.
So I think he has done a lot more work in this area than I have. And if I say that if I remember correctly, the he says the difference between the two epics is probably a few decades, 50 to 100 years between the two. And it seems that the Ramayana happened before the Mahabharata, but it's one of those things that tradition tells us that tradition tells us that the Ramayana happened before the Mahabharata, firstly, and second, that the Ramayana is put in a different yuga itself than the Mahabharata, right? So you have the Satyug or the Krita Yuga, and then you have the Treta. So Ramchandra ji is also called Treta Ka Thakur. Uh, and the events on the Mahabharata, and as you rightly pointed out, some of the lines of sort of conduct and dharma have sort of blurred if you compare it with what happens in the Ramayana, which the Dwapar Yuga is also said to signify that the dharma has decayed by half. Dharma, if you look at it as a representation in the form of a cow, it is now walking on only two legs. And tradition also tells us that the start of Kali Yuga is basically marked by the end of the Kurukshetra war. So bad as though things get in the Mahabharata and the Kurukshetra war, Kali Yuga is supposed to be even worse than that.
Mhm. I think there is one more question in chat.
This one, no, I don't think I know enough to really have any kind of an informed opinion on this one. So I will pass on this question.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
What is one of your favorite Upakyan or Upakathas? You must have looked at various other stories also apart from the 67. Is there any other story that has struck you?
Oh, there are several of them. In fact, at the end of the war and right before Bhim and Duryodhan have their last battle, the Gada Yudh, Balrama enters Kurukshetra and he arrives at the battle scene. And right at that point, we have the Tirth Yatra Upaparv that takes place, where Balrama basically describes all his travels to different pilgrimage sites that he has. So there are several such stories there, but there is only one that is included in the Upakhyana. So some of them are fascinating in their own right. One of the stories that is not there in this list of 67, but which is I thought was fascinating, is the one that is recounted towards the after the war when Bhishma is lying on his deathbed and he's giving his discourse to Yudhishthir, is about Vishwamitra and how Vishwamitra, it's a time of great drought and famine, and food is very difficult to come by, and everyone is starving. And Vishwamitra almost gives into the temptation of eating dog meat. Dog meat is something that is prohibited generally. He doesn't quite, follow through, thankfully, but we are told how he struggles with the temptation because, after all, it is a question of either eat some food or die, and he's trying to rationalize it. So that's one fascinating story. It's not in the list of 67, so I didn't include it, but I think it's definitely well worth repeating.
That's the survival instinct, right? So that's
Absolutely.
really,
So as the
yeah,
Mahabharata tells us that you cannot preserve dharma if you are dead. So as they say in Hindi, "Jaan hai to jahan hai."
true, true. Very fascinating. Uh, i- Is there any follow-up project or book you are working on?
Yes, there are several, but given my given the slow speed at which I write and finish stuff, I don't want to share anything because it could be months and months before anything happens and turns out. Uh, this book itself was something that I was very happy it came out because at one point I'd started thinking whether I was capable of writing a second book at all after having written my first one a few years earlier. So there are some book projects based on the Mahabharata, on the Puranas that I am working on, as well as a couple of fiction, projects. But I have no idea when they'll come out. I'm sorry.
All right. We hope that you will be able to produce some more books or the works, and we will be able to enjoy as a reader. Any other question from audience? I assume there are no more questions. Thank you very much, Abhinav ji, for sharing these subtales, which serve as a vital thread for connecting the text in the Mahabharata. We are very much looking forward to read these Upakathas and the stories in your book. I thank all the participants for attending this event. Recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Please do subscribe there. You can register for future events on our website, indicforum.org. See you all in the next one. Thank you, Abhinavji, once again. Uh, See you all, everyone, next time. Namaste.
Namaskar, everyone. Thank you.